do I?
We're going live on everything.
Oh, I'm live now. Hello, Instagram. Okay, got it.
Live through Facebook.
I gotta make sure I stay in the shot for Instagram. And we are live on Facebook.
Yes.
And YouTube. Well, hello, everybody. Another live Dad University. What is today? I don't even know what day it is.
Tuesday.
We've been going crazy, doing all kinds of stuff. But welcome any questions you guys have. If you are joining us, be sure to put your questions in the chat of whatever you are. Now, see, I'm looking over here. I want to make sure I'm looking at the camera, but I've got multiple cameras, so bear with me as I get used to this too. It's only going to take, 80 episodes for me to finally get used to it. So, a couple things I want to talk about today. First is, are we on? Are we okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First, I want to talk about parenting mistakes. These are certainly debatable, and you might have difference of opinions, but that's okay. That's we welcome that. These are the mistakes that I believe I see parents make. I may have been guilty of some of these myself, but I realize that when I'm going to separate these because I have some parenting mistakes for new dads and young dads, and then the other is for once your child gets a little bit older. There's different mistakes. We make different mistakes at different ages of our children. So first thing, when you have a baby, there's certainly mistakes that we make as parents. And one of the things I know that I did was I took my child's crying personally. So when they were crying and they were upset, I actually took that personally as that I was either doing something wrong or that I did something to them or that, quite frankly, they were out to get me in some way. And it's simply not the case. And you can often feel like you're doing something wrong or you're not doing the right thing. Either way, it's kind of similar. But that was an issue that I certainly went through, of feeling like that, especially when the baby was crying or the baby was upset or different issues, and I felt like somehow that was like my fault. I wasn't doing something correctly. So that's a mistake I think that we as parents do, is that we take these things personally, and it happens for both mom and dad. Both of us make these mistakes. So, another is not paying attention to your wife or your significant other or the mom of your child. So what happens is, the focus changes a little bit, and when a mom is pregnant, a lot of her focus is just dealing with the baby. She's got physical changes, she has emotional changes, and I recently got a note, an email. Somebody was kind of upset that they felt like they're dealing with all this stuff too. Why should they have to pay extra attention to their wife? And that was kind of the question, was about that. And my response was, yes, you're both going through a lot. The idea is to be empathetic with your partner, and while your wife should be empathetic towards you too, you can't control what she's doing. You can't control how she acts towards you. You can't. So you need to sort of own it on your own and say, okay, well, what can I do? And so part of that is, you can pay more attention to her, and that's how you can support the baby. So that's that. How's it going? How's the live?
Good.
We're okay. Audio's okay. Seems
Yeah.
like
You can ask them. See what Pat and Gavin think.
we have some people on here.
We do.
It's hard for me to see the screen. I don't know if you got it from my. Pat, good to see you back. Gavin, hello.
Are you able to read those?
Yeah, I can read that. Yeah, so if we have a man and woman listening, certainly the woman's going to like to hear this stuff. This is, and here's the thing is that when I talk to dads, we only have, and I just mentioned this, we only have control of what we can do. You can't force somebody else to act a certain way. You can't force somebody else to like something or want to do something. So all you really have control is over yourself. So when I say these things, it doesn't mean that your wife or significant other shouldn't be doing those other things on their own. But what are the things that you can do? And that's kind of where this comes in. It's like, it really does take both people to make this work. So another mistake, that's kind of like the topic of today is mistakes in parenting. Yeah, Instagram's all right. Yeah. It's pause, I guess. It does that on occasion. I'm not sure why.
Reconnecting. It's
sort of
network.
Apologize, Instagram. It kind of connects and goes back. So, awesome. Facebook looks and sounds great. Thank you, Gavin. So what happens is also when we have a new child, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I mean, forget about the fact that you'd have pressure from other people and situations, family and friends and everything else, and your job. But we put the pressure on ourselves, and that's not something that you need to do. And I think that was a mistake that I made also. So we put pressure about how we should feel, how we should act, all of those things. And so when you've got enough to worry about that, you don't necessarily want to put excess pressure on yourself. Hello, Instagram. Pablo, how are you? It's great for you guys joining us. If you have questions, please feel free to jot them down. We'll be doing this every Tuesday as long as people still want it. We're getting used to this and getting the kinks worked out. We've had some technical issues that we're working with, but it's gonna be good. So so I think putting that pressure on yourself is difficult and definitely something that you want to try to avoid. I think another thing is not taking care of yourself. What happens is you get so focused when you have the baby of worrying about is the baby okay? This is obviously when the baby's born, your attention is so much with the baby that you kind of forget to take care of yourself. And this happens a lot with moms too, that you forget the me time that you really need. And so it's important if you're in a relationship or in a marriage that you give each other that time. And that's what's important, is you give each other that time to kind of do your own thing. And so if your wife enjoys something, make sure that she gets the opportunity to still do that, and you vice versa. So you really have to give time to yourself. It's not a ton of time. And as you have children, that time gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's just the way that it is, and then as they get a little bit older, you get some of that time back, and so that's just kind of the nature of it. But you're going to want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and that you have to define what that means. But it's the stuff that otherwise you're going to start going crazy. You feel like you're giving and giving and giving, and you don't really have you kind of lose yourself. And I would say in general, this is in general, of course, it seems that that affects women, and women do that more often, meaning they don't take the time for themselves than men do, just because of the early child rearing and some of the things that come with that, whether they're breastfeeding or such. And so, sometimes, and obviously they're typically the majority of time they're the major caretaker for the baby. They spend more time with it. Hey, Instagram, how are you? Good to see you guys. So, you know what? That's a great question. If you guys have questions, write them down. We're going to definitely get to some of these questions. I've got a couple more things, and I'll make sure to get to the questions. So if you have them, that's good. So another thing that is a mistake is comparing your baby to other babies. And, this happens all the time where, I can recall situations where, you hear it, whether it's from your spouse or other people, and you say, well, my baby, or they say, well, this person's baby at age 3 months was already sitting up and doing this and eating this. Or you start to look, if they go to daycare or something, you start to look at all the other children and you're like, well, mine's not doing that. In general, you just have to stop worrying about it. Now, if there's significant differences, huge gaps in learning and extremely far behind, and that's kind of different. Then of course you're going to want to take them to the pediatrician and get that checked out, because there could be some sort of disability or abnormality. But in general, there's so many different times and delays that it just, comparing your baby to somebody else's baby is just, it's a waste of your time. And you'll find that even having two children, mine ate different things at different times. They sat up differently. They walked differently. They crawled differently. They rolled over differently. They slept differently. That's just the way that it is. And so you have to be careful, because when you start comparing, which we all have the problem with, that can become a problem. So, and then the last thing for new parents, as far as mistakes, is enjoying the moment. I think this is something that I suffered with, and I wish I would have known these things a little bit earlier, is that I had, I really didn't enjoy the moment as much as I think I wish I would have. Because there's so much going on, I sort of didn't appreciate the current time. And it's kind of weird and it's kind of hard to say, but you're going through so much, and you're sort of surviving. And then I also found myself looking to the future. And so what I would do is I would say something like, oh, I can't wait until my son walks and then we could go for a walk, or can't wait till we go play catch or something. And what that does is it takes you away from the present moment. I think I've said, it's not horrible to think about the future, but it kind of takes away from the present moment and the positive aspects of the present moment. So you want to be careful with that. So I've got some more stuff of mistakes, but I want to answer a question here from Gavin. We're having our first child in a few months, and I have no idea how to hold an infant. So, good question. There's actually some really good videos online. There's some funny ones too. One of the things that's really funny, a gentleman, I don't know his first name, but How to Dad is his YouTube channel, and he has some funny ones of like how to hold a child, and they're named different things. Basically, I had some favorite. I'm trying to think if there's anything around me that I could use as a baby. But basically, holding the child, you can watch some YouTube videos. I always felt like the child was so delicate. That was something I felt like I was either gonna like break it or drop it or do something. And all you really need to worry about, there's kind of two things. One, that the baby is secure, that it's not going anywhere. And then the two is very early on, is holding its head. When they're very, very young infants, they have the difficulty of sort of keeping their neck up and the strength of their neck, and so you just want to make sure that you're holding that head. But literally, you will hold the baby for the first time, and it'll be a couple minutes, if not, shortly after that, and you will feel like an expert. I promise. You will feel, you still might be a little bit scared that something's gonna happen, but and I had a tendency to hold the baby in a certain way where I would just hold him like this, or I would hold him on my shoulder. If you don't feel comfortable, sit in a chair. That's usually either sit on a chair or sit on a bed or lay down on the bed, and then that's an easier way for you to feel comfortable and get used to it. So I hope that answers the question. But definitely there's some YouTube videos. The one with the How to Dad is really funny. I think he's got like a football hold and then a reverse Jesus, and he's got like all kinds of things that he does, and he names them, and they're pretty funny. There's also a doctor that has how to stop a baby from crying, and it's a very specific hold type on a baby, where the baby is face down on your arm, and the arms are crossed. So the baby's arms are crossed, the baby's down, looking outwards, and you basically hold the baby out. And this doctor's been doing this for 20 something years, and literally can and shows it live or shows it recorded, shows him stopping babies from crying. It's pretty amazing. I wish I would have known that technique. That would have come in handy. So if you guys have questions, thank you guys for joining us here live. If you have any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to jot them down. We're going to be doing these lives every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Just reading some of the notes. Yes, Pablo, it is important to understand that child development and learning is not linear. Totally agree. Thank you for that input. It's very true. So we're talking about mistakes. If you guys have had any mistakes as parents, if you are parents, I think we even have some grandparent on. Maybe some of the mistakes that you've made that you sort of wish you didn't make. That's something we all can learn from. So as the kids get older, your mistakes change a little bit. And one of the things that that I think I dealt with I kind of knew right away, I had studied this, was that we do too much for our kids. And a lot of people, a lot of parents feel like that is the way that they show love, is by doing things for their children. And fathers, for sure, in whatever aspects, by doing something for the child, you feel like that's a way that you are showing love and that you're giving them love. The problem with it is that a lot of times you're doing something for them that they should be doing for themselves, and you're keeping them from growing and learning. And so I'll give you an example. I take my kids to school a couple days a week. My wife takes them as well. And I often will see parents of kids with their backpacks. And the parent will take the backpack and carry it for the child. So my stance on this is that if the child is old enough to have a backpack, they're old enough to carry it themselves. This goes for luggage, this goes for backpacks, this goes for whatever. Now, there are instances where something is really difficult, really heavy, sure, but even in those instances, hey there, Snazzy Mom, how are you? Good to see you. In those instances, there are those occasions where it's a little, it might be a little too difficult for them, but you want them, and oftentimes they'll complain. They'll say, hey, I can't take this. It's too heavy. Can you help me up the hill? And a lot of the times I'll say, you know what, you shouldn't have brought it. Or, you know what, you need to, bring less stuff. That'll happen on our vacations where our kids want to bring their suitcase and they want to bring 27 stuffed animals. You might say, hey, guess what? Maybe you shouldn't bring those rocks or those stuffed animals with you because you're going to end up being the one carrying it. Those are some examples. Another example is, cleaning their dishes, getting dressed. The child is totally capable of getting themselves dressed. And what happens is, a lot of times parents, this is a bigger issue, but parents will want to dress their kids because they want to kind of control what it is that they're wearing. And it's funny, I once heard a teacher say that she can really tell, or often tell, the type of parenting somebody has, or at least somewhat, based on the fact of how the child dresses. Now, if the child is completely sloppy and messy and disheveled, that's a different issue. But when a child has, 2 different colored socks, maybe the shirt doesn't match the pants, those kinds of things, that's typically the fact that the parent, it's not that important to the parent and they allow them to do that. And especially if you know that it's a nice child and the child is normal, but they've got, they're dressing in that way. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is allow them to do those things for themselves. So they're allowing to pick out their own clothes. They're allowed to choose or get themselves dressed. They make their own lunches. And so all of these things that we feel like we do for them because we either, one, we often feel like they're not capable of it, or two, we do it because we love them and we want to help them. But the truth is we're not helping them. So you're going to want to back off from some of that stuff and allow your child to do those things for themselves, or at least allow them to try. And you can be there to support them. You can be there to sort of help them along, but let them do things. And that's in so many different aspects. I mean, there's a lot of occasions where, I will think that my children are not capable of doing it, and I make that mistake. And then I'll in my head, and I'll say, you know what? Go ahead and try it. And guess what? They do totally fine. And that can be from cutting something and using a large knife to, and certainly you want to be careful of what you're allowing them to do. But I've had other stories. A gentleman that was in one of my groups, he had a 4-year-old and he was allowing him to barbecue. And he told him, hey, this is hot. You can't touch this. He gave him the instruction, but he allowed him to do some of those things. And that's the way that they learn. Now, you can't put your child in danger. This is a disclaimer. I'm not saying that you let your children play with fire and knives and all that. They need to be supervised, or your hands are right there helping them or such. But we need to allow them to do much more than we actually do. And it builds their confidence, self-esteem. It really helps them grow when they get to do those kinds of things. And quite frankly, it helps around the house. It helps you have to do less, which is always, it's a good thing. Another mistake as our children get older is do as I say, not as I do. And so what do I mean by that? We often will tell our children to do something in a certain way, or how we want them to act, but we are not acting that same way ourselves. So an example of this could be yelling. We will often get very upset at our children for yelling. And in fact, we are then yelling at them for yelling. And I find it funny. I catch myself doing that all the time, where I want my children to not yell, but then I will yell at them for yelling. And so it's a very interesting thing. But the do as I say, not as I do is a common mistake that we all have. We tell them not to eat certain foods, and then we eat those foods. Hey, don't have sugar, and then we have sugar. Or don't do this, and then we end up doing it. Don't use your electronics as I'm on my phone. Those kinds of things. So you want to be very mindful of that. That if you're telling your child to do something, you have to do that as well. Got a question here from Pablo. What are some mistakes in regards to their failures and how we respond? So, great question. In regards to their failures, I did a video called, how important it is to let children fail. And one of the things is they need to really understand from you a couple of things. One, that it's totally okay to fail. And so that is a mistake that we often make, because parents will get upset at them failing. Sometimes they'll get grounded, or they'll get disciplined from failing or not doing something well. And then also is the underlying is that we're not providing them unconditional love. And so when we give them a ton of praise and a ton of accolades when they do something really well, we are actually saying, hey, when you do something really well, we're not saying this, but it's indirect, is I love you more when you do things right. When you do things well, I love you more. And that's not the message that we want to give them. So think Instagram keeps going out and going, well, it's paused. We'll get back to it. I'm not sure what's going on there. So that's something in regards to their failures that we often make those mistakes. I think they want to feel like they can come to us with anything, and that if they're going to, and if they do make a mistake, it's totally okay. And we have to pretend, like we can't pretend that we don't make mistakes. I think another thing that is a mistake that we make is that we try to hide our mistakes to our children, and instead of explaining how we made a mistake and being honest about that. And so I will often, if I yell, not every time, but if I yell, if I handle a situation poorly, maybe I'm stressed out and I act out or whatever, I will apologize to my children. And what I have seen is that they now do the same thing. So what'll happen is maybe a situation's going on, I get really upset, I walk out of the room and cool myself down, and then I come back and I say, you know what? I probably could have handled this a lot better. I shouldn't have yelled at you, and I'm sorry. And so what happens is that they see this thing that we make mistakes, we recover from them, and we can apologize if as long as we understand the mistake that we made and how to fix it. And I think they really learn well. They learn well from that. So that's something that I think is really important. So another mistake that I think that we make with children as they get a little older is that we are their friend instead of their parent. And so what do I mean by that? Well, this happened all the time as I was growing up, where we'd find out that hey, the kids are allowed to have beer or something else because the parents are there. And the parents, that's a whole other subject, but the parents were essentially acting as friends instead of acting as parents. And that can happen in many aspects. And so whether that is, the parent is getting and doing shenanigans with the kid, they're getting in trouble with the kid and whatnot. And while some people would argue that that's great bonding, or that you have that connection and that's something that you enjoy, I have a tendency to disagree with that. And there is a line, and my kids know, and I'll make sure that it's clear that if something that I disagree with, it's their choice to make in some cases, but I'm not going to endorse it, and I'm certainly not going to agree with it, and they have to then kind of live with those repercussions. So I think that's something. Vince, how are you? Good to see you. If you guys are just joining us, feel free to ask any questions. We're just doing a live show here. I'm sweating under the lights. We've got some lights set up, and so I apologize if I'm sweating here. But yeah, so it's some good stuff. And so yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Not making parenting mistakes. I don't think any parent has ever felt that way. I mean, you can feel like you've learned all the things in the world, and you've studied and you've done, but it's like we all make so many mistakes, and it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes, and you want your kids to know that it's okay to make mistakes, and how we deal with them then is very important. So, yeah. So maybe we can open a window. I don't know. We'll see if we open a window if it gets a little better in here. If we start hearing sirens, then we won't. We'll change that. But yeah. So another thing is, and let me know if the sound gets too windy or something. Let me know. But another thing is nutrition. Something that and granted, I understand I might be on the completely one end of the spectrum because of my diet, and so but it's so important that our children understand good nutrition, and what I think is a mistake that parents make is, teaching is not teaching their children about the nutrition. So here's the thing: is like, we can't keep our kids from enjoying candy and enjoying things that aren't necessarily good for them. But I think it's important that we teach them balance, and that you can we have a thing in our family where it's good food before bad, and not to say that, hey, abuse happens where you eat too much candy and you eat too much ice cream, and then the end result is, well, how do you feel about that? How did you end up feeling after you did that? And understanding that, like, this is something that needs to be taken in smaller quantities, even though it might taste really, really good. And then this is something that you want to make sure that you have because it's good for you and it fuels your body. So, those are important things that I think we need to instill in our children. And I think it's a mistake by a lot of parents, from my opinion, that we don't teach that. And part of it is I don't think as adults many people understand that also is the rates of obesity and diabetes and that kind of thing is off the charts, and that people are unhealthy. So I think it's something that's very important. Yes. So Vince added, the personality of the child and our techniques have to go hand in hand, and that's very true. It is often, as Vince said, it's trial and error. You can have two very different children, and something that is working with one child is not going to necessarily work with the other child. They have different personalities, and unfortunately, you treat them differently because you have to. So those are certainly, that's another mistake. It's a good information that we make the mistake of treating them the same, and they're not all the same. And so what happens is like, you might have a child that's a little bit more sensitive than the other, or you might have a child that doesn't listen as well, and so you have to adjust to that. And that is definitely a trial and error. And so that's something that's important. So a question as a follow-up from Actidad. Mark, good to see you. How do you get kids to eat healthy? Says, I was just talking about nutrition. So great question. So first and foremost is you have to eat healthy yourself. So if there's a lot of junk in the house, that's certainly going to make it more difficult. And so one of the things is monitoring that, and sort of maybe limiting the amount of junk that's in the house. I think the other things are habits, and so one of the things is like that we've done with our children, and has seemed to work pretty well in most instances, at least when we're home. It doesn't necessarily work when we're out or on vacations or we're doing other things, is that we don't do dessert every night. We do like the desserts on weekends. And so our kids look forward to that. They have ice cream, or they have some cookie or something, and that, for them, they get to enjoy that. So it's not that they can't ever have it, but it limits it. And so we know that, hey, like during the week, we're not having that for dessert. That's just not what we're doing. And then at the end of the week, we can. I think the other thing is, and I have a couple videos. I have one specifically on how to get your kids to eat healthy. Is there's a couple different ways. One is you can actually, when they're real little, you can do it secretly. So in other words, you are putting nutrition into a food without them really knowing it. And it's easier to do when they're much younger. But as an example, they're having pasta that's literally, it's zucchini instead, and it's rolled zucchini. Or you're making muffins that have spinach in them. There was a book by Jerry Seinfeld's wife that has a lot of that. Hey CJ, what's happening? So that's sort of a deceptive way to do it. I think you can kind of limit that. But you also you want to make it taste good too. And then the other ways is just teaching them and being honest. And so I don't think you can completely eliminate things because they might abuse it or they'll want to do that. But getting them to eat healthy starts with you, and it is very hard to tell them to eat healthy if you're not eating healthy yourself. So I think you can use those kinds of menus and do that food. And then you also you make it taste pretty good. You know, like we do it often on Friday nights. We'll do a Mexican night, and you know we'll use ground turkey instead of ground beef, or we'll substitute some other, maybe it's instead of having the taco at one time we're having it on a salad or something. Like it's just some different options and different choices that when you start eating that way, your children see it and they sort of become used to it. And I think it's introducing foods that are also good and also making those choices. So it's not something that's easy. I can't claim it's like, oh, hey, my kids eat wonderful all the time. It's not the case. It is something because there's stuff all around. It's tempting. It tastes great. They know that sugar tastes great. And so it's just finding that balance all the time. And, but as an example, we went out the other night and my kids made a good choice. We were talking about, or they made a choice for themselves. And we were talking about having dessert. We were going out to dinner. It was a treat for them on a Saturday night. And they wanted to get yogurt. And so they said, well, we'll just, we'll get a little, I said, we can get a small one. And they were like, yeah, no, that's great. And so, they were okay with having a small amount because it was a treat. So I think it becomes an ongoing discussion, and certainly they're going to test the limits where, we've done Halloween. This has been interesting where we just said, eat whatever you want. Go ahead, make yourself sick. And they did. And we thought it was going to curb their desire to eat more candy, and it didn't. So that was a failed experiment. So like many things in parenting, you think that you're doing it a certain way and you're doing it right. And, and they surprise you all the time. Sometimes they surprise you in a positive way. Sometimes they don't, Wes is asking, are children born loving sugar or do they learn that? So there's definitely science that talks about, palates, and different children have different palates. But we learn very early on, because of the introduction of foods, of how good sugar is. And there are some movies, there was one on Netflix, I think it's called Sugar, that talks about this and how...
Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and how addictive the sugar is, and how, you can tell this from a very small age. When you introduce, baby food, and we used to puree our food, and you would have like peas or something maybe that's not as sugary, and then all of a sudden they had carrots or they had sweet potatoes, and you see the child's like face light up. They can taste it immediately, and there's something, it goes to the brain. It's like, wow, like this is really flavorful. So, not even flavorful, it's really sweet, and they enjoy it. So I think that that's something that over time, we develop it and we learn that, hey, the sugar is really good, it tastes really good, you become addicted to it. And so I think that that's something, you have to manage when they're young. And, we see it all the time. It's not easy. You can't just say, hey, listen, you can never have something. And we've looked at that, like even within my own family of like, hey, you can't have that at all, versus the complete opposite of the end of the spectrum of like, hey, just go ahead and have whatever you want. Let's see how that goes. And I think that there has to be some sort of middle ground, and that can work. One of the other issues that I dealt with, or I think that many parents dealt with as a mistake, was trying to solve all of their kids' problems. And we've got this issue with the college admissions and the college scandal, admissions scandal, and a lot of this is about parents kind of controlling what's happening with their kids and trying to solve the issues that their kids might be facing, with maybe they're not able to get into a good enough college, or there's a situation where the child doesn't make the sports team, and so the parent is going to go and make sure that their child is on that team. whatever that problem is. I mean, even if it's sometimes, if it's the sibling problems, our children know that if they're having a problem with each other, don't come to me. Don't go to mom. That's not going to solve the problem unless it's something big. They will still try and they'll yell out mom or dad, blah, 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 blah is doing this. But they also know that the response is universally, you guys can, I'm pretty confident that you guys can work this out. Or, hey, what happened when you talked to them about that? And so what you're doing is promoting them to solve their own problems. Now, there are certainly situations where, your input might be valuable, but at the same time, you're going to want them to try to solve the problem themselves. So even at a very young age, children, you'd be surprised at how well they can solve their own problems. And so that's an example is a child, the child will come to us and say, this is going on at school. They're not necessarily even asking you to solve it. This something that men, as we like to do, is we like to think that everybody asking us a question or telling us something is that we have to solve the problem. And that's not the case. So I think part of that is you don't need to solve all their problems. You can be there for support. You can be there to help coach them along, but don't try to solve it for them. And then another one is another mistake is allowing their behavior to affect how we feel and our state. And I can tell you, I still struggle with this. This is something that I work on all the time. We all, I think, deal with this, is that somebody else's comments, somebody else's, the way that they talk to you, something that somebody did, the way that somebody else is acting affects how we behave and affects how we feel. And I was just watching a video, actually, of Sadhguru, who is an Indian mystic. And one of the things he spoke about is how no matter what somebody says, no matter what somebody does, no matter what somebody feels and whatever, it has zero outcome on how he feels. And that's kind of, I think, the place to get to. It might be unrealistic if we're not mystics, if we're not a guru, but I can see how powerful that is, and I try to practice that a lot. Is somebody might say something, and I'm trying to instill that in my kids is that somebody else's behavior affects them. So when somebody says something, somebody at school could be teasing them, and instead of saying, well, that's just what that person's saying, they internalize it and they take it to heart and they do that. And so that's something I think that we do as parents. It's a mistake, is that our children's behavior then dictates whether we're happy, sad, stressed out, not stressed out, whatever. And instead, not allowing others, especially your kids, to affect you in that way. And I think that's a big mistake. So if you guys have any other questions, we talked about mistakes today, kind of wrapping it up. Yeah. If you guys have any questions, if anybody else has anything, we can. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and call it a day. Do want to let you guys know, every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, we are, 7 p.m. Eastern, sorry. Don't even know what time and day it is. We are on Instagram. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope. So you can find us on all those channels, your favorite channel. Also, send us a message. Let us know what you think of the live show. If there's some format that you think might work better, we love feedback. Also, share. Love when you guys can share it. If there's something that applies to you or you feel that somebody else might benefit from, do that. And then also you can email us. You know what? I got to set up a specific email for this.
Yeah.
live@daduniversity.com. I'll make that live@daduniversity.com. I'll set up that email, In fact, I'll do it right after the show. See, we're that new and we're doing things on the fly. So thank you guys for sticking with us. For all of you that are watching it in a replay, thank you. And we will see you next time.